A Day in Salem, 1692. The Witch Trials. Paranoia, Gallows and Execution. In Salem, the devil does not live in the forest. He sits beside you on the church bench, waiting for you to stumble over a word so he can inherit your land. You wake in July 1692 in Salem village, and the air tastes like suspicion. The heat is oppressive, the kind of New England summer heat that makes everything stick to skin and doubt cling to conscience. The town has transformed in months from a place of Puritan order into something that defies language, a place where the rules have been rewritten, a place where your neighbor's accusation carries more weight than your innocence. The concept of Salem in July 1692 is difficult to grasp from safety, but breathing it, living it, reveals the complete dissolution of everything that once seemed stable. The law has become weaponized. Justice has become revenge. Truth has become whatever the afflicted girls say it is. It began months ago. In January, two young girls, Betty Paris and Ann Williams, began having fits, convulsions, accusations that they were being bewitched. The fits spread to other girls. Soon, a dozen young women were experiencing the same symptoms, and each accused a woman, then another, and with each accusation, the machinery of the courts was activated. The trials have been happening for months. The convictions are certainties. The evidence, spectral evidence, is testimony from the afflicted that they can see the accused's spirit tormenting them. No physical proof is required. No reasonable doubt is entertained. If the afflicted girls point and scream that you are a witch, you are guilty. The only question remaining is execution or confession. You walk through the village streets, and the absence of normalcy is overwhelming. There is no market activity, no easy conversation, no gathering of neighbors for simple commerce. Every interaction is calculated. Every word is weighed. Every expression is scrutinized, because any of these things could be evidence of witchcraft. A harsh word to a neighbor, a curse spoken under breath, a glance of anger toward someone's livestock that subsequently dies. The meeting house, the center of community life, has become a courthouse. The pews where people once sat in prayer now hold the accused. The pulpit where sermons of salvation were preached now witnesses confessions of damnation. The sacred space has been perverted into an engine of execution. You see a woman being led through the street. Her name was once respected. She was known for her skills in midwifery. She delivered children. She helped the sick. But now she is accused. A girl pointed and screamed her name. That was sufficient. She was arrested. She was brought to trial. She was convicted. Now she is being led toward Gallows Hill. Her existence is being erased in real time, and there is nothing she can do to stop it. The psychological weight of Salem is that innocence is not a defense. In fact, protesting innocence can be taken as evidence of witchcraft. The accused are trapped in a logic that is inescapable. Confess and live. Proclaim innocence and die. But confession carries its own punishment. You must name accomplices. Other witches. You must provide names so that the hysteria can continue, so that more people can be arrested, so that more trials can be held. You encounter a man standing alone in the street. His expression is hollow. His wife was executed last week, hanged from the gallows after being convicted of witchcraft based on spectral evidence. The testimony of teenage girls that they could see her spirit in the courtroom. He fought for her. He testified to her character, He presented evidence of her innocence. It meant nothing. The machinery was already in motion. Once accused, innocence becomes irrelevant. The heat intensifies as morning becomes afternoon. The streets seem narrower. The buildings lean inward. Everywhere there are eyes watching. Everywhere there are calculations being made. A woman in the market was seen talking with someone who was later accused. Does that make her suspect? A man purchased herbs from an apothecary. Are those herbs for healing or for hexing? A child was born with a birthmark. Is that a witch's mark? Evidence of being suckled by a familiar spirit? The paranoia has become total. Mothers are suspicious of daughters. Husbands are suspicious of wives. Siblings are suspicious of each other. The bonds of family and community have been dissolved by the simple understanding that accusation equals guilt. That being pointed at by one of the afflicted girls is sufficient to destroy a life. You pass a house that is empty. The family fled. Parents took their children and left Salem in the night, hoping to escape before someone, an old enemy, a business rival, someone holding a grudge, pointed and screamed witchcraft. The house stands abandoned, a sign of the mass exodus that has begun. People are leaving Salem, understanding that the hysteria will not stop until it consumes itself. But leaving brings its own dangers. If you flee, are you admitting guilt? If you try to escape the witchcraft accusations by leaving, does that not prove that you are indeed a witch? The logic is circular. There is no escape. Every action can be interpreted as evidence of guilt. Every attempt to defend yourself can be used against you. The trials themselves have become theater. The courtroom is packed. People come to watch the spectacle. The afflicted girls perform. They convulse. They scream. They point at the accused and describe in vivid detail the torment being inflicted upon them. The magistrates listen gravely. The crowds gasp. And at the end, another person is convicted. You witness a trial beginning. A woman stands accused. The girls in the courtroom begin their performance. They writhe on the floor. They scream that they cannot see unless the accused touches them. They claim that invisible hands are choking them. They describe invisible pins being stabbed into their flesh. And based on this testimony, with no physical evidence, no corroboration, no way to disprove it, she will be convicted. The woman protests her innocence. She speaks clearly. She explains that she has never practiced witchcraft. She has never harmed anyone. She has never had contact with any devil. But her words are powerless against the girl's accusations. In fact, her defense might be taken as evidence of her guilt. Witches are known to be deceptive. Her denial might simply be further proof that she is indeed a witch. The magistrates listen with the gravity of men performing a sacred duty. They truly believe they are doing God's work. They believe that Satan has invaded Salem, that witches walk among them, that the only way to save the community is to identify and execute the witches. They are not acting from malice. They are acting from conviction. This is, in some ways, more terrifying than overt cruelty. The machinery of evil operates best when those operating it believe themselves to be righteous. You find yourself in a tavern where conversations are happening in whispers. Men are discussing the trials. Some express doubt. But they whisper this doubt. They do not speak it aloud, because voicing doubt is dangerous. Doubt about the trials might be interpreted as skepticism about witchcraft. Skepticism about witchcraft might itself be evidence of witchcraft. So the doubters whisper. They keep their thoughts hidden. They wait for the hysteria to burn itself out. But the hysteria is not burning out. It is accelerating. More girls are joining in. More people are being accused. The list of the condemned grows daily. 20 people have been executed. More are condemned. The executions happen on Gallows Hill with grim regularity. The condemned are hanged while crowds watch. And each execution seems to validate the entire system. Yes, there are witches in Salem. Yes, we are right to execute them. Yes, we must be vigilant. We must search for more. The tightrope you walk as a resident of Salem is impossibly narrow. You must be religious enough to be above suspicion, but not so ostentatiously religious that you draw attention. You must be productive, but not so successful that you inspire envy. You must be sociable, but not so talkative that words can be twisted against you. You must be careful, always careful. The weight of this carefulness is suffocating. An old man sits on a bench. He has lived in Salem his entire life. He has watched the community grow from wilderness to settlement. He has seen prosperity. He has seen cooperation. He has seen neighbors helping neighbors. And now he watches it all dissolve. He understands that what is happening cannot continue indefinitely. The hysteria must eventually exhaust itself. But before that happens, how many more will die? How many more will be destroyed? You pass the prison where the accused are held. The conditions are brutal. Chains, darkness, filth. Some of the accused are already dying from the conditions of imprisonment. Some are starving. Some are going mad. One woman, Rebecca Nurse, is 80 years old. She was convicted despite the attempts of her large family to defend her. Despite her reputation as a devout Christian and a healer. Despite everything that should have protected her from the accusations of teenage girls. But none of it mattered. She was pointed at. She was convicted. She will be executed. The sound of the town in July 1692 is distinctive. There are few birds, few sounds of normal commerce. What remains is the sound of whispered conversations, the sound of footsteps moving quickly, the sound of doors closing, the sound of chains in the prison, and somewhere in the distance, the constant, the endless sound of the afflicted girls screaming that they see the witches, that they feel the witches' power, that the witches must be stopped. You encounter a girl, one of the afflicted. She is perhaps 15. Her face shows the strain of performing hysteria. But perform she does. She points and accuses. Names are added to the list of the condemned based on her word alone. You wonder if she believes her own accusations, if she truly sees the spectral forms of witches, or if she has become addicted to the power that her accusations provide. The power to destroy, the power to control, the power to be heard when no one listened before. The afternoon deepens. The heat becomes oppressive. The sun seems to press down on the town with biblical weight. You find yourself on Gallows Hill. The gallows stands empty at the moment, but it will be used again and again and again. Until how many? Until the hysteria consumes enough people? Until someone with authority finally questions what is happening? Until the girls get tired of the game? The view from Gallows Hill shows the town below. Houses, fields, the forest surrounding everything. The forest from which the girls claim the witches draw their power. The forest where Satan supposedly gathers his servants. But you understand now that the real forest, the real darkness, is not in the woods. It is in the hearts of the town's people. It is in the willingness to believe without evidence. It is in the eagerness to condemn without proof. It is in the machinery of community turned against itself. You move back toward the town as evening approaches. The heat is finally beginning to break. The sun is lower. The shadows are longer. The town takes on an appearance of normalcy as night falls. Lights appear in windows. Families gather for evening meals. To a stranger arriving in Salem on this evening, the town might appear peaceful, might appear normal. Only those who live here know what lies beneath the surface. But the appearance of normalcy is precisely the mechanism of the terror. The town is still operating. Church services are still held. Commerce is still conducted. Meals are still prepared. But all of it is overlaid with the understanding that anyone could be the next to be pointed at, the next to be accused, the next to be condemned. You settle in for the night. You are careful to lock your doors. You are careful to maintain proper devotion. You are careful in your thoughts. You are careful in your words. Because caution is the only defense available. Not the law, not innocence, not character or reputation. Only caution. Only the hope that you can navigate the minefield of Salem without being accused. But caution is exhausting. It is a form of constant terror. Because even your caution can be used against you. If you are too quiet, are you hiding something? If you are too private, are you consorting with the devil in secret? The logic is inescapable. There is no safe response, no correct action, no possible behavior that cannot be reinterpreted as evidence of guilt. And somewhere in the darkness, the girls are preparing for tomorrow's accusations. Somewhere, someone is deciding who to point at next. Somewhere, a family is about to have their lives destroyed. Somewhere, another person is about to be marched toward trial, toward conviction, toward execution. The night in Salem is full of sounds. The wind through the trees, the cry of animals, the occasional human voice. But underneath all these sounds is another sound. The sound of a community consuming itself. The sound of hysteria becoming normalized. The sound of evil operating under the banner of righteousness. You understand finally that Salem in July 1692 is not primarily about witchcraft. It is about what human societies become when fear becomes more powerful than law, when accusation becomes proof, when the testimony of the marginalized, the young girls with no other power, becomes weaponized into an instrument of social destruction. The day ends, but the terror continues. Tomorrow there will be more trials, more convictions, more executions. The machinery will continue grinding until something external finally breaks it. Until a minister questions the validity of spectral evidence. Until a magistrate begins to doubt. Until the hysteria finally exhausts itself and the town wakes to understand what it has done. But that awakening is still months away. For now Salem drowns in its own paranoia. For now the next person is already living their last days, already unaware that their neighbor is preparing to point and scream, already trusting that reason and innocence will protect them, already wrong. What would you do? Experience more historical moments through Past Eye POV. Subscribe and let us know in the comments.